Hello, everybody. My name is Stephen Cohen. I work at the Mirowitz Center, and I am delighted to welcome all of you today to join us for this very special presentation from Ben Hochman. As you all know, Ben is the sports columnist for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. But for most of you who are born and raised here, the important thing is that he's an alum of Clayton High School and the University of Missouri School of Journalism. He's the author of 3 sports books. He's currently writing a 4th about the 2011 St. Louis Cardinals. And when that book gets published, he's going to be coming right back to talk to us about that book. It's a pleasure to welcome you all, and especially our guest today, Ben. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Stephen, for having me. Thank you, Judith. And wow, this is awesome. Fun to see some smiling faces and some recognizable names. And this is going to be a bunch of fun talking about sports in St. Louis in 2020. Like Stephen said, I'm one of the sports columnists for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, which even after 5 years is surreal to hear those words coming out of my mouth, because that was always a dream job of mine. You know, a lot of kids wanted to be Superman. I wanted to be Clark Kent. I always wanted to be a journalist, a sports writer, a newspaper man, and I got that job first for the New Orleans newspaper, and then I went to the Denver Post. And when Bernie Miklas, the great writer for the Post-Dispatch, announced he was leaving the newspaper, being a St. Louisan, I was like, oh my gosh, who are they going to get to replace the great Bernie Miklas? As a fan, as a reader, I was like pretty invested in this and nervous about just who they would pick. And of course, when I got the phone call to apply for the job, it blew my mind. But now it's an honor to be one of the guys in the newspaper who writes about my hometown teams, the St. Louis Cardinals, the St. Louis Blues, the SLU basketball team, Mizzou Tigers. But I'll also say a lot of my favorite stories have been maybe the untold stories in St. Louis sports, or the ones you don't hear as much. For instance, this summer, I wrote a piece about Ed Crenshaw, a name some of you might remember. He was the University City high school basketball coach for many years. But before that, he was a coach out in O'Fallon, Missouri. He's an African-American man, and he took over in the early 60s as the basketball coach in an all-white school. And it was a special time because the players didn't look at him as a black man. They looked at him as coach, a mentor. And it was a really special bond they had, and lessons were taught in O'Fallon, Missouri in the early 1960s that permeated through some of the community, and frankly, I felt was important to permeate through our community here in 2020, so I wrote about it for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. The topic today is sports in 2020, and as many of you know, no year in sports has been like 2020. Though there have been some wild and wacky years, of course, I don't think anything can compare. Even 1918, during the fluenza, obviously it shut down a lot of sports. Washington University, I wrote a story about their 1918 football team. They still played that year, but nothing is like 2020, where our favorite sports just basically stopped all at once, and it was bonkers, and it was historic. But now we have sports coming back. I guess my question right away, please raise your hand if you are a fan of the St. Louis Cardinals. Okay, all right. Exciting. I see a lot of hands and smiling faces. I really think what the St. Louis Cardinals are doing in 2020, the fact that they are even competitive after missing 17 days due to 18 players and staffers getting COVID-19, and they're still competitive. They have an 18-17 record. They're in second place, and that means you can make the playoffs in 2020. It really is astounding to me, because I just felt that this team, once they took that time off, they were just going to go down the toilet. And yes, some of the hitters have gone down the toilet. You can argue that Matt Carpenter has not done really well this year. And you look at Harrison Bader, he's a frustrating hitter. But I kind of try to look at life with a glass half full. And there is a lot of optimism about the 2020 St. Louis Cardinals. And Paul Goldschmidt, I don't know. I mean, a lot of you follow the team, so you know about him. I hope you can realize how special it is that St. Louis has such a talent like Paul Goldschmidt performing for our city every night. He's not Albert Pujols, but he's that next level below. He is a stupendous hitter. He's a humble player. He likes to be involved in the community. He's a nice guy. Unfortunately, he's not Jewish. I thought for sure Goldschmidt would be Jewish. I got really excited when they acquired him. I was all set to ask him about his bar mitzvah and everything like that, but apparently he is not Jewish. However, Harrison Bader is, so that's something. And Rob Kaminsky, the pitcher for the St. Louis Cardinals, is Jewish, so that's kind of neat as well. But yeah, Paul Goldschmidt is having an amazing season. I've got some stats here. He's hitting .330. That's pretty impressive. I mean, imagine he's doing his job. He's preparing. Everybody's getting ready for the season. And then they stop doing physical activity for 17 days, basically. And then he comes back, and he didn't miss a beat. It was really impressive. But for me, the biggest story of the St. Louis Cardinals this year, and if you haven't been paying attention, you should, to Adam Wainwright, the ageless pitcher. I mean, I don't know if all the fans know this. He was set to quit, to retire a couple years ago. Done. Imagine that. He was going to stop playing baseball, but he gave it another shot. He rejuvenated his arm. He rejuvenated his mind. And Adam Wainwright is pitching like an all-star this season at age 39, which in baseball age is pretty high up there. And he pitched a complete game the other day. And when I was growing up and when a lot of us were growing up, complete games were more normal. You had the Juan Marichals, the Sandy Koufaxes, the Bob Gibsons. Those guys were pitching complete games, no problem. These days, with the micromanaging of bullpens and stuff, that you don't see many complete games. But there was Adam Wainwright with catcher Yadier Molina pitching a complete game against a good team, too, the Cleveland Indians. It was one of the most special moments in sports this year. And I feel, again, like we've all kind of had some rough times, everybody on their own certain way, but we've all been affected by this rough year. And baseball can be an escape. And I felt like that afternoon, just watching Adam Wainwright mow them down, it was just kind of like for us, for St. Louis, for the fans. And it was a special afternoon. And I'm not wearing a hat, but if I was, I would tip it to Adam Wainwright for that. I do want to bring up just the fact that the year 2020 from a political, I'm not going to get too much into politics, but from a political social justice standpoint in sports, that too has been historic. And some of you probably remember 1968. I was born in 1980, so I don't remember the 1968 Olympics. But I was fortunate to cover the 2008 Olympics. I went to Beijing, China, and I was with the Denver Post. And one of my assignments, one of the stories I did was I got on the phone with John Carlos and Tommy Smith. And some of you are nodding your heads. Most of you know John Carlos and Tommy Smith, but for those that don't, these were the gentlemen who won medals, bronze and gold medals for the United States in 1968. And we all remember 1968 and how turbulent it was. And they wanted to make a gesture that was seen and heard around the world. So, of course, on the medal stands, they put black gloves on their hands and put their fists up during the national anthem. And it was controversial. It was big. It was international news, and they were sent home, and they were vilified. Well, now in 2020, we're seeing in our community, and again, I'm not trying to bring up politics per se. I'm just trying to bring up the news of the day. I guess that is politics. Sorry about that. But what I'm getting at, of course, is John Carlos and Tommy Smith in 1968 were special. They stood out. They were unique for what they did. But now we're seeing the majority of athletes, many athletes, millionaires, all of them, white, black, everybody, is standing up for what's right, standing up for social justice in our country. And it's a beautiful thing. It's a powerful thing. And yeah, to use this word again, it's also a controversial thing. And not everyone believes that politics should be in sports. That, famously or infamously, Laura Ingraham on a certain news channel made reference to LeBron James saying, he should just shut up and dribble. And where she was coming from was saying LeBron and the basketball players are just there to entertain us. And of course, that was a controversial statement because the players took that, and I took it. It was a very offensive statement. And the players are like, no, we are human beings. Many of us are African Americans living in 2020. And we want to speak up. We want to speak up for what's right. And it has been a very, very powerful year in sports. Again, historic. And I think back to my conversation in 2008 with John Carlos and Tommy Smith about 1968. And that it really resonates with me. And I've been thinking about that a lot in 2020. And to bring it back to the St. Louis Cardinals, I don't know if you saw this, but a couple things happened that were historic from a Cardinals standpoint. Before one of the games, all the Cardinals wore a T-shirt that said Black Lives Matter on the field, on Busch Stadium. And of course, that was news. That was something. And a lot of people were frustrated by that. A lot of people said, and you can point to the Black Lives Matter organization itself, and even Dr. Gerald Early, the very intelligent star on the St. Louis Walk of Fame, African-American professor at Wash U, he pointed out that the Black Lives Matter organization itself has a lot of Marxist values. But the phrase Black Lives Matter, the mantra, the mindset that everyone is trying to promote is for many, many years, decades, generations, centuries, Black people in our country have been treated unfairly. Let's do something about it in 2020. Let's try to be kinder. Let's try to be more accepting. Let's try to listen more and hear their stories. And that's what the St. Louis Cardinals were trying to say to St. Louis with their shirts. Did it work? I don't know. We're having a conversation today. Hopefully other people will as well. But the idea is that athletes in 2020 are using their voice and their brand to speak volumes. And we used to see it in small doses. Now we're seeing it with everybody. I would love, and I don't know the best way to do this, maybe Judith can help facilitate this, but if anybody has any questions or thoughts that they wanted to share, and we could talk some sports in 2020, St. Louis sports, I'm happy to answer questions and get some conversations going. Judith, is this possible?
That's perfect. You can either raise your hand or if you want to type in the chat box, raise your hand on the computer, however you would like to. Morton Levy, I will, let's see.
Morton and Sanford.
Hi there.
And Robert Braun sent in a question I can answer a little later too, but we'll start with Morton. Hello.
Hi, how you doing, man?
I'm great.
I want to just add to what you sort of said about in 1968. I remember watching on TV one of the, while Washington was burning and Boston was burning, one of the Black radical leaders came to St. Louis, and they interviewed him as he was leaving at the airport that he'd had a rally that nobody came to. And he said, I want to talk about riot and revolution, but all these cats want to talk about is the Cardinals. And so I thought that was sort of fitting with what you had said about the Cardinals.
Yeah.
And something about evolution and then I'll be quiet, of ideas was I was on the UCLA track team when I was in college. And I was out there with my son we were actually going up to Cal Santa Barbara. But I ran down to the track. I was jogging in those days when I was younger. And on the track were some guys I knew from the team who were still very active and much, much better than I ever could have dreamt to be. And while we were there sort of talking, Tommy Smith was there. And it was with a young high school senior from California that he was training on that track. And he turned to us and said, "See this guy? He's the fastest white boy in California." So that's the end of my story.
That's great. And you mentioned, Morton, the 1968 year. Of course, the St. Louis Cardinals were in the World Series, and that's why he said all these cats, all they want to talk about is the Cardinals, because they were such an amazing team. I've written a few books about sports, and one of them was a history book called The Big 50 about the St. Louis Cardinals, and just 50 topics about the Cardinals from over the years. Of course, the 1968 team was in there, and that World Series, that season was obviously really, really fascinating. But not only in St. Louis, but Detroit. That's who St. Louis played in the World Series and lost to Detroit. It was a 7-game series, a very hard-fought series. Some might remember Bob Gibson striking out 17 people in Game 1, a World Series record, and something that people in St. Louis talk about today. I don't know if you all do this, but like with Bob Gibson had the 1.12 ERA. Whenever I'm driving around town, if I see like a building and the address is 112, I always think of Bob Gibson. Or if I buy a pack of gum and I it's 98 cents or whatever, and I get the receipt and it's $1.12, I'm like, oh, that pack of gum cost Bob Gibson. I don't know if you guys do that, but I think like that. I'm weird though, I admit that. But I mentioned St. Louis, also Detroit. Detroit was burning too. There were many riots in Detroit in 1968. One of their star players, Willie Horton, was also from Detroit. And there was a story where he literally wearing his baseball uniform after one of the games drove down to the part of town where the riots were to try to calm people down and try to make it the most, I guess the word would be like thoughtful protest without as much looting and rioting and more thoughtful protesting. I just, that image, right, of a ball player wearing his uniform, showing up in the city to do that is powerful stuff. So yeah, the 1968 World Series, that was another sports story that brought together sports and politics of the time. I believe Sanford, did you have your hand up?
Well, Jay Dubinsky has a question too.
Benjamin, this is a comment. You mentioned that Harrison Bader, that Paul Goldschmidt was not Jewish, and that is correct. However, his grandparents were in the Holocaust, and I have heard him make comments numerous times that he is very proud of his Jewish heritage, even though he himself is not Jewish. Also, did you say that Harrison Bader was Jewish?
Yes, I have heard that from numerous people in the Cardinals. He's from the New York area. I have not asked him about it. That's the one problem with 2020. Well, one problem with 2020, 1,000 problems with 2020. But one of the problems with 2020 is the reporters aren't allowed to go in the clubhouse at Busch Stadium, which makes sense. So I haven't been able to speak to Bader personally about that. But I've heard that about Bader. And then Rob Kaminsky, the rookie pitcher, he also is a Jewish man. And I saw real quick. Oh, go ahead, Judith. I'll let you.
I was just going to mention we have like 3 or 4 questions that are typed. Do you want me to read them out loud to you, or how would you like that?
I've got them here. Hello, Bill. Good morning. Robert Braun asked, why isn't Carlson playing? That's a great question. So for those that don't know who Carlson is, that's the 21-year-old top prospect in the St. Louis Cardinals organization, Dylan Carlson. And according to scouts, the Cardinals haven't had a prospect this good at hitting since Oscar Taveras, who, if you recall, was the great young hitter who tragically died in a drunk driving accident. I believe it was 2014, and he was very young as well. The top prospect before him, hitting-wise, Albert Pujols. So this guy, Dylan Carlson, in 2020 is in amazing company. They called him up to the big league team. He got some hits early on, and then he started struggling. For those that don't know the nickname, the Mendoza line, in baseball, if you're hitting 300, that's fantastic. If you're hitting 200, whew, that's pretty bad. And there was an old ball player, Mario Mendoza, who a couple seasons was he hit like 197 or 195 or 199. So they all joked that 200 was the Mendoza line, since that was his last name. And so hitting 200 is not good. I always wondered this. I played for Clayton High School in the late 90s, and I was good at defense, but I couldn't hit as well. I was not a good hitter. I was surprised that none of my teammates ever didn't come up with the nickname for me, the Bendoza line. I would have called myself the Bendoza line because I was such a bad hitter, but no one came up with that pun. I dodged that bullet, I suppose. Harrison Bader, he was hitting in the 100s. And early on, he was making a lot of hard contact. And it's funny, we talk about batting average a lot in baseball, and we get excited about certain statistics. Well, these days, there's a lot of new statistics that we didn't have when we were kids. One of them is exit velocity. They literally have the ability. Obviously, we know you can figure out how fast a pitcher throws the ball. These days, they can figure out how hard a ball is hit off the bat. Early on, Harrison Bader was getting a very high exit velocity on his hits. However, he was hitting them right to the guys, as they say. So he was hitting hard outs. And even though he was getting out, the team was encouraged because they're like, hey, he's hitting the ball hard. That's all we can ask for, right? Well, that stopped happening. Pitchers started pitching Dylan Carlson with a lot of off-speed stuff, some difficult stuff, and he wasn't hitting well at all. And they decided finally to send him down to the minor leagues, which isn't even happening this year. They aren't playing minor league games. They have a minor league camp where the players are playing against each other. They wanted Dylan to kind of get his head right and get back. But I say this, and I wrote this on our St. Louis Post-Dispatch website yesterday. Even though this may have looked like a step backwards, I feel like the experience that Dylan Carlson got was a step forward in his progress because he got experience in the big leagues. And now in 2021, when they're back, they're playing a 162-game season. Hopefully we're back in the stands and safe and happy. In the regular 162-game year, Carlson will use that experience to start off better and stay stronger and really contribute to that ball club. John Reichman, I hope I pronounced your last name correctly, John. What is my prediction for the 2021 St. Louis Blues? They didn't look like the defending Stanley Cup champs in 2020. That's a great perception, John. And, you know, it's very easy. So basically, for those that don't know, the Blues won the Cup in 2019. They were doing great in 2020. The pandemic hits. We're off for 3 months. They come back, and what happens? They don't look right. They played poorly in the playoffs this year. And, yes, it is easy to make excuses or point a finger. Some of the guys had COVID-19, and you could argue that their bodies weren't recovered well enough for the playoffs. You could argue that maybe the team wasn't motivated enough playing in this strange scenario of Edmonton, Alberta, playing in a bubble up there as opposed to in St. Louis in front of the fans that love them. But the Blues blew it, is what I'm getting at. Is every other team was in the bubble too, and the Blues were not mentally tough enough to rise to the moment and play the game the way they're capable of, because they had pretty much the same players that won the Stanley Cup. But the question for John was, what is my prediction from John was my prediction for next year. And I'm cautiously optimistic. Maybe that's a theme of mine. Maybe that's a weird trait of mine, but I am cautiously optimistic about the St. Louis Blues in next season, 2021. They have a lot of young players too, who I'm very excited about. And we mentioned Dylan Carlson for the baseball team. One name to remember for the hockey team is Jordan Kyrou. Jordan Kyrou. He's, I believe, 21 years old as well, right around that age range. And he is super fast. You can't teach speed, as they say in sports. And he's still learning the intricacies of NHL hockey, of playing 200 feet, as they say, defense and offense. But there are some moments where he's gotten the puck and has just exploded up ice, showing a speed unlike any other player on the St. Louis Blues. So here's thinking that Jordan Kyrou will be a bigger factor on the St. Louis Blues in 2021, 22, and so on. Here's a question, another question. Does Cutie Pie Bader practice his Judaism? I'll have to ask Cutie Pie Bader the next time I get a chance to speak to him. And also, I'm as a guy with weird hair, or not weird, well, maybe it's weird. The guy with a lot of hair, I respect Harrison's flow, as they say. The kids call it flow. Another thing they say is they call it lettuce, a head of lettuce. I respect Bader's head of lettuce. Are there any other? There's a couple more questions I can answer in the forum here. But does anybody have any questions they want to ask with their?
Harvey Gerstein.
Okay. Harvey.
You have to unmute Harvey.
Oh, Harvey. Yeah, hit mute or unmute. Harvey. Oh, there you go.
There we go.
Hi, Harvey.
I just saw a lot of pictures of the new football stadium that Kroenke built. I was wondering your opinion on the NFL treatment of St. Louis and what's going to happen in the lawsuit.
Yeah, it's a great question, Harvey. Thanks for joining us today. The St. Louis Rams, of course, owned by Stan Kroenke. I'd say they sometimes I say it was a kick to the gut. Other times I say it was a punch to the gut. Perhaps looking back, they both kicked and punched St. Louis in the gut. They got us good. They took our team and followed the money and went to Los Angeles and built the stadium that Harvey made reference to, which was now it's almost weird to say the sentence, $5 billion stadium. It cost $5 billion for Kroenke to build this palace in Los Angeles for his Rams. And the question was about how the NFL treated St. Louis. I would say about as poorly as a league can treat a city. The owners and the commissioner, of course, should look at each NFL city as one of its babies, as one of its children, if you will. We respect the city. We respect the fans. And this was a town that cheered on a Super Bowl champion in 1999. And they basically said, in the name of money, in the name of a billionaire becoming a multi-billionaire, if you will, St. Louis, see you later. And that hurts, and that's frustrating. And the one thing I'll say is that that Harvey mentioned that there's a savvy lawsuit against Kroenke in the NFL. I'm not a lawyer, even though when I was single, I used to tell the ladies I was when I was at the bar. I'm kidding.
You know what?
But I'm not a lawyer, but I will say that it sounds like the St. Louis folks will get their day in court, where the Los Angeles folks will probably have to testify. And again, I don't know who's going to win the lawsuit, but just the idea that they thought they could run out of town and never show up again, that they'll probably have to drag their butts back to St. Louis and answer some hard questions. I think that's maybe it's petty, but I'll call me Petty, call me Richard Petty, Tom Petty, whatever. I'm that petty guy. I'll take it. Put him on the stand. Let's hear it. Thank you, Harvey, for your question. I appreciate that.
And we have Sanford who has a question.
How is Bob Gibson doing?
Yeah, well,
Sanford
I have a
has
couple
help.
of comments here about the Cardinals. First of all, I kind of agree with playing these three young outfielders here and see what you really have. Apparently, it's not hurting the team that much because they, like you said, they're in second place and they're in playoff position there, and you have to take some time and figure out what they have and what they don't have. Obviously, Dylan Carlson wasn't much, but I kind of agree with playing some of these young guys. I don't know, maybe you know, what happened to Fowler? I don't know what kind of an injury he has that took him out of the lineup. Then, secondly, in my comment on their fabulous hitting coaches, fellow Bird is supposed to be a terrific batting coach, and I think we have some of the worst situational hitting in the entire league. We can never move a guy over, never make a progressive out, a productive out, which he's supposed to be such a fabulous hitting coach. I don't think he's doing so well. And I guess thirdly, I do have a question. How many of these athletes act into their neighborhoods, particularly the Afro-American ones? Lou Brock, of course, just passed away, and he was noted for going back into the neighborhood. Are you very familiar with many of the, and sometimes even newscasters, sportscasters who are Afro-American, and the ball players? Do they really go back to the neighborhood much and help out in their foundations? I don't mean to be critical. It's just a question that, thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I guess I'm trying to remember all the questions. You talked about the young outfielders, and yes, Tyler O'Neill, he's out there. He's around the Mendoza line as well. Harrison Bader, who we mentioned, is a fantastic fielder. So for all the runs he might not produce with his bat, he prevents runs with his glove, so that's good. But Dexter Fowler, he was actually having a really, really good season. I wrote what I write down here about Dexter here. He was hitting 280. Yeah. So Dexter Fowler has some sort of a stomach illness, the team said, and he has to take certain medicine for it. And because of it, it weakens his immune system. So because of COVID-19, they wanted to keep his weakened immune system away from the players. So that's why Dexter isn't playing right now, nor that's why you don't see him with the team in the dugout or in the stands, waiting with the players. So that was unfortunate because he was really having a good year. I'll kind of parlay that first question to the third question, because you mentioned the African-American players in the community. I will say this, Dexter Fowler and Jack Flaherty, who have spoken a lot publicly about standing up for what's right, have said that they want to learn more about St. Louis. They admit that it's not their hometown and that they don't know everything about it. And I truly believe, and one of the good things that's going to come from all this is that Flaherty and Fowler will start being more interactive with the communities. And one thing I don't know if everybody knows yet, but the St. Louis Cardinals, those players, and even myself and some of the St. Louis sports writers, we took our pay for that one day, I believe it was Jackie Robinson Day, and donated it to and obviously my pay was nothing compared to the ball players, but donated it to the baseball field at Harris Stowe. And they're refurbishing this field, and the significance of it is it was the field that the Negro League team in St. Louis played on all those years back. And Major League Baseball and the Cardinals are doing a really good job of bringing awareness to the Negro Leagues, teaching young people and old people alike, all people, about the history of the Negro Leagues and these great athletes who maybe didn't get as much attention in the news, in the newspaper, and on TV at the time. They're now getting love and respect from the communities. And that's powerful and important. Your second question, I feel like there's a science thing where if someone tells you three things, you always forget the middle one. What was that?
That's okay. Jeff Alpert, the batting coach. What do you think about him? All the unproductive outs.
So here's sometimes we sometimes the articles for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch get posted at like 11:30 p.m. before midnight, and I'll post it on my Facebook like, here's tomorrow's newspaper today, and I'll post my article, and I feel like I'm clever. But what I'm trying to get at is here's tomorrow's newspaper today. Here's a hot tip that Ben Frederickson, the other columnist for the Post-Dispatch, is working on an in-depth piece about your very question, about Jeff Albert and his role with the team. So I myself am curious to see what Ben Frederickson will reveal from his reporting for that column. But I will say, and you're absolutely right, Jeff Albert was praised as this hitting guru, as this guy who was able to motivate and inspire and bring out the best hitters out of young ball players. And the theme of this conversation has been that the young ball players are not hitting well. So, of course, you have to say that Jeff Albert is part of that. Is he the full reason? No, but he's clearly not helping a lot. And you're absolutely right to point that out. So those were great questions. I really appreciate it. And real quickly, somebody asked if I knew how Bob Gibson was doing. Unfortunately, I don't know. I don't have a direct line to Bob Gibson. I know our esteemed Hall of Fame writer Rick Hummel does occasionally speak to Bob Gibson, and Rick does his best of updating us in the newspaper. So I hate to say, just keep your eyes open in the newspaper for Bob updates. But yeah, with the passing of the great Lou Brock, of course, it makes us think of other ball players from his generation. And I will take this moment to say, Lou Brock, what an amazing ball player, but also what an amazing human being. Like you said, Sanford, he was really involved in our community. You see these quotes coming out from people that knew him, from his son, Louis Brock Jr., who said he loved the fans the way the fans loved him. It's pretty special to have. We were blessed. We were fortunate to have a ball player who didn't want to just wear St. Louis on his hat. He wore St. Louis in his heart too. And he lived here and was part of our community for many decades after he hit 3,000 hits for our hometown team.
Norman Solomon has a question.
Hi, Norman.
First, Ben, firstly, go Greyhounds.
Now we're talking Clayton Greyhounds.
My question is, does a St. Louisan have to be fairly wealthy to afford to go to our sporting events?
That's a good question. I don't want to say fairly wealthy, but there is no question that tickets are exorbitantly higher than they were proportionally to when we were younger. And that is a great point. I will say that the Cardinals and the Blues analyze so much data, way over my heads and maybe yours too, I don't know. But they break down so much data in regards to how much tickets should cost. And of course, they need to make money off ticket sales. That's part of their overall revenue. But they also keep the fans in mind, and I think they try to find that sweet spot with the tickets. I feel better just saying that, acknowledging that they do that they're not just these guys and girls sitting around the office saying, like, let's just try to get as much money as we possibly can from our fans. I don't feel like that's the mindset. But there's no question. I mean, you go to these games and things like a hot dog, things like a soda, they're very expensive. And if you want to, it's frustrating. We used to talk about going to the airport, things at airport prices were jacked up. You go to the ballpark, it's the same way. And to get a good seat at the ballpark, yeah, it costs a lot of money. And you're right. And I guess I'm rambling here, but to answer your question, I would believe that there are definitely families in St. Louis of all races that want to go to the ballpark, that want to take their young daughters and sons to the ballpark, but choose not to because they would rather allocate those funds, that money, for something more important in their lives, which is unfortunate because I think everyone on this call can speak to a time they went to the ball game, they walked into the stadium, and the experience made their lives better a little bit, made them happier. Going to a game can be therapeutic. Going to a game can be a beautiful moment of sharing baseball or hockey with your parents or with your loved ones, with your own children. There's something special to that, and it does make me sad that fans of the team don't get to do that because of how much the tickets cost. I will say that the television broadcasts, as we know, have never been more advanced, and the home viewing experience has never been better. And that also is a reason why some people might say they don't want to go to the ballpark, because a lot of people have these fancy TVs with the HD, and you're sitting there, and it really is looking like you're at the stadium. It's so clear, so crystal clear. The green is so green. And oh, by the way, the beer is free at home, and you don't have to pay for parking, and you don't have to walk back to your car after a loss and you're all frustrated. Oh, and I parked 3 blocks away from Bush because I wanted to go to the $10 lot and not the $20 lot, and now my legs are killing me. And Bader couldn't get the key hit, and we lost the game. And this is, why did I even choose to go to the game in the first place? I have a 60-inch TV at home with HD. So I think a lot of people think that way too. I appreciate your questions. Judith?
We have Steve Schwed, who has a question. And I don't know, did you actually answer Robert Braun's question before? I might have missed that.
Oh, yeah, Steve,
What
if
about
we can,
Nolan Gorman?
yeah, if I can just jump in on this one, Steve, before I get to you. Robert Braun asked about Nolan Gorman, the third base prospect. Do I think he'll be called up from Springfield? I don't think that Nolan Gorman will make his major league debut in 2020, but it is possible that Nolan Gorman could make his debut next season. And there's a lot to like. I spent a day in spring training back in February, back when the world was normal, walking around with Nolan Gorman, just watching him take swings against pitching, take swings in practice, and he's got a beautiful swing. He's a youngster. He made history as the first player born in the 2000s to be drafted by a Major League Baseball team. So he's young. I think he's 20 years old right now, maybe 21. But no, I don't think Gorman will be on the team this year. But remember that name, similar to Jordan Kyrou, the hockey player. Remember the name Nolan Gorman with the St. Louis Cardinals, because I think he could be a third baseman of the future. And as we've seen, the third baseman of the present, Matt Carpenter, is not having a good season yet again. Steve?
Steve wrote, our
I'm sorry, I
salary.
was on mute. I was just wondering, you were talking about the high ticket prices. We see some salary and bonuses that are given to some of these players that just seem astronomical. What percent of like the cost for the teams is tied up in salaries, and how does that, well, it goes with ticket prices, I'm sure, for profitability. Are we getting way out of range with those?
It's a great question. And one thing I think we've learned from 2020 is the reality that a lot of these teams truly need the ticket revenue to stay afloat in Major League Baseball. And it's all relative, right? But we're saying stay afloat in efforts to pay $100 million worth of salaries to their ball players. I will say that, I mean, I'm sure, and I'm guilty of it, I remember growing up in the 1990s. Can you believe how much they're paying Ray Lankford? And I'm sure someone older in the 60s. Can you believe how much they're paying Bob Gibson, and I'm sure someone in the 1920s. Rogers Hornsby makes how much money? I mean, they've obviously the numbers these days are, as to use your word, are astronomical, but it's been a theme of sports forever that the ball players get a lot more money than maybe you could argue that obviously more than the regular person does. But the reality is the owners are making gobs of money off. We mentioned the ticket sales and the revenue and the TV deals. A lot of people know this already, but if you don't, I mean, so much revenue comes from having a television deal with Fox Sports Midwest, or in Colorado, they've got the Rockies have a thing with Root Sports, whatever the network is. There's so much money to be made off TV that yes, the revenue is, everything is higher and bigger. But I don't think that it's not, or what I'm trying to say is it's not that the players are making this crazy amount of money and it's the poor old owners that are stuck and how do we pay all these players? I mean, everybody's profiting off this with the caveat of revenue from 81 home games annually is a pretty important part of that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Do we have other questions?
I saw one that I didn't answer from Bill. I apologize. He said, I mentioned Adam Wainwright and his agelessness. He says, do you see his performance and attitude as being an intangible inspiration for other Cards players, especially the pitching staff? That's a great question. And yeah, I mentioned earlier how statistics have overtaken baseball, and there's a stat for everything, and there's a numerical analysis for everything. They literally have a stat now called pop time. Pop time is the stat for how quickly a catcher catches the ball, pops up, and throws the ball to second base for a stolen base. They figured out the speed and time of catchers doing that. They've got a number for everything is what I'm rambling about. Which leads us to your point, Bill, about the intangibles of attitude, of inspiration, of leadership. And yeah, you can't put a number on that, but anecdotally, you talk to Jack Flaherty, you talk to Cardinals pitcher Dakota Hudson. These guys speak about Adam Wainwright with reverence, and they speak about all the tricks of the trade they've learned from him. And no, we can't say, oh, Dakota Hudson got that third strikeout in the fourth inning, surely because of a conversation he had with Adam Wainwright in late August. We can't necessarily do that. But again, anecdotally, these ball players say that the Wainwrights of their world, the Yadier Molinas of their world, the leaders, the Matt Wieters, the backup catcher, these guys have an influence on them, and they help their overall mosaic of a season, if you will. And that's special stuff. And what else is neat about that, and Stephen mentioned that I'm writing a book currently about the 2011 St. Louis Cardinals. Talk about time flying. Next year will be the 10-year anniversary of the 2011 Cardinals winning the World Series with David Freese and Chris Carpenter and everybody like that. Matt Holliday, of course, Albert Pujols, Tony La Russa's last season. I bring up that team because Chris Carpenter was an important pitcher on that team. Well, he was a mentor of Adam Wainwright. And how special is it that he passed his wisdom, his leadership, and inspiration to Wainwright, who thrived for many years as a St. Louis Cardinals pitcher. And now Wainwright is passing it down to Flaherty and Hudson. And oh, by the way, when Carpenter arrived, there were older pitchers on St. Louis that motivated him. So it's a neat heirloom, almost like we as fans pass down our love for the St. Louis Cardinals to the next generations like an heirloom. The players themselves pass down their wisdom and their mindsets and their attitudes to the players, and they carry the torch, if you will, from the previous generations. It's a special thing.
I have a question.
I think Mort Levy had a question.
Okay, and I think Jay's got one as well. Mort and then Jay, huh?
Okay. Speaking of Flaherty and the Cardinal pitching, how would you evaluate the progression of the young Cardinal pitchers this year? They seem to have a great ERA, but I don't know about individually how they're doing.
That's a great question. I think Flaherty is the marquee name, and you watch the way he controls batters and is able to pitch with efficiency in the majority of his starts, not all of his starts, but efficiency is so important. I think when we were growing up, it was all about getting the strikeout. Ooh, it's the big bad strikeout. It's such a cool visual of the guy striking out, and it's a boost to your team. It's a boost to your morale. But the idea is, if you're able to effectively hit your spots with pitches that are going to be poorly hit, and Flaherty does this pretty well, you're able to get out of an inning faster. So basically he's saying, I dare you, hit this pitch. Because when you do, it's going to be poorly hit, and it's going to go right to Colton Wong for an easy out, right to Paul DeYoung for an easy out. And he's doing that. Dakota Hudson, he's been off and on, but he's another one of those guys who relies a lot on what they call contact. And his sinker ball, I've seen some improvement in that. When he gets that going, he can be a dangerous pitcher, and his walk rate is down too, and that's important. He was one of the worst pitchers in Major League Baseball last year, Dakota Hudson was, in regards to walking batters. And then you look at the bullpen and some of these young arms, someone like Austin Gomber, who started I think he's starting today in one of the doubleheaders. He's got this curveball that you could argue, besides Wainwright, is the best curveball in the St. Louis Cardinals organization. So keep your eye on that. That's something that pitching coach Mike Maddox has worked really hard to develop. And Ponce de Leon, a cool name, he struggled a lot earlier this year, but even in a loss, wait, did they win that game? Even what I'm trying to say is, even in an outing that wasn't superb, we saw some strides from Ponce de Leon in his most recent start, and that's encouraging as well.
As a follow-up, does your daughter have a favorite player yet?
I was blessed to have a daughter born this year in June. Does she have a favorite player yet? That's a great question. I see when she watches the game, she really gets excited when Colton Wong makes a defensive play. So let's go with Colton Wong, a household favorite here. Thanks for the questions, Mort. Jay, what's going on?
According to the report this morning, there's a good chance most of the playoffs will be in a bubble. What's your opinion of that?
I think that's smart, because we talk about home field advantage in a regular season, right? Well, what does home field advantage means? It means two things. It means the ball players sleeping in their own beds and hanging out with their families and not having to travel. But it also means the loud crowd and the intangible of that and feeding off the crowd. Well, of course, there aren't crowds in 2012. I guess there are crowds, but they're made out of cardboard, as we've seen, sitting behind home plate with the cardboard cutouts. So if indeed Major League Baseball has their playoffs in a bubble, the home field advantage from a crowd standpoint, it wasn't going to be a factor anyway. So we might as well get the ball players in a bubble to make sure, as we've seen in hockey and basketball, the bubble has prevented the spread of COVID-19. So it sounds like it'll be good precautionary planning. The other fact is you can get all the media there at once. So the playoffs is a big deal to Major League Baseball. You can get the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, the sports writers, to just go to California, if that's where the bubble is, and be there and cover all the games. We can get the TV stations to be there. So what I'm getting at is there will be even more baseball media coverage of the playoffs if there is a bubble. And of course, they want as much coverage as possible because that means more eyeballs on their sport. And that means, like the theme of a lot of these conversations, more revenue for the owners.
There's another question I don't know that you got to from Robert Braun. Are Mizzou Tiger questions?
Yeah. Robert Braun asked, are Mizzou Tiger questions okay? Yes. Who will be their quarterback? I think it's going to be Robinson, but they're doing such a good job of keeping that under wraps. It's amazing these days how paranoid college football coaches are, NFL coaches too. They don't want you to know anything about their players. And as journalists trying to tell the stories of the players and getting the news of the team, it makes it harder. But the coaches try to keep everything out of the newspaper until the game actually happens. How do I think they will do under their new coach, Elia Drinkwitz? Well, I think they're going to do pretty well over time. I don't think they'll do that well this year for two reasons. One is it's a weird year with the pandemic, and some of the Mizzou players have struggled with COVID-19. We're seeing 14 guys have been kept out of practice lately. A lot of question marks with the Mizzou team. The other thing is because Mizzou is only playing opponents from their conference, from the SEC, they've got 10 games, and they had to add 2 more games to their schedule. They were playing 8 games against SEC teams, while each team got 2 more games. Who did Mizzou get added to their schedule? Alabama and the defending champion, Louisiana State LSU Tigers. So basically 2 losses were just put onto their schedule because of this weird year. So that's too bad for them. It's almost, from a sports standpoint, scary to think that Mizzou's first game, I believe it's on the 26th of September, is against Alabama. And right now, Mizzou's still trying to figure out who's healthy enough and who's experienced enough to play on their offensive line. So I'm a little nervous for Coach Drinkwitz in his first season, but I really like his attitude. I've talked to people in high school levels who've been recruited by him. They love his energy. They love his vision. Coach Drinkwitz has been a winner at every level he's coached at. And I think over time he'll prove to do well for Mizzou, but just not in 2020.
I think Harvey Gerstein has another question. Harvey?
Oh, it's me, Wilma Gerstein.
Hi.
Sorry, Wilma.
Hi. I know Melina's contract is up this year. Do you think, I'm sure they will, but do you think they will sign him and for a lot more money?
I don't know if it's going to be for a lot more money, but if I'm a betting man, I'm thinking that Yadier Molina will never play for another team. I think the idea would be that if they bring him back, he might not, they will have to come to some agreement. I don't think he can play 162 games. And they've got this guy, Andrew Kisner, who's not a bad ball player, and he's a really good defensive catcher. He's really improved that way, and he's the catcher of the future. I think they'll work out. My guess is they will work out something where Yadier returns to the Cardinals, because most good teams already have a catcher in place. If another team was going to bring Yadier on board, it would probably be and was looking for a catcher, it would probably be a bad team. And the last thing I think Yadier wants to do is sign with the Miami Marlins or sign with some team that's not going to compete for the playoffs just so he can get more at-bats. For him, it's about winning. And I think if he wants to be a winner, he's going to stick with the team that he's already won a lot with.
Well, I think, does anyone else have any further questions? This was such an exciting, John Reichman has something.
Yeah, Ben, I was just wondering, growing up, I'm in St. Louis. I know you must have had some favorites. You want to run down your favorites and any great memories you had growing up?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, when I was a kid, naturally, Ozzie Smith. I was born in 1980. My first season of memory was 1987. The Cardinals were in the World Series with Ozzie Smith. They had Joe McGrain, the rookie pitcher, who I really liked. I remember I have it on tape at the 1987 World Series. My father and his brother were shown by the camera coming out of commercial break. It was kind of a funny little thing. My dad was wearing a pin from the 1964 World Series, and they zoomed in, and Al Michaels, they showed my dad and my dad's brother, and they said, hey, the 1964 World Series, how about that? Tim McCarver, Lou Brock, Bob Gibson, and they're showing my dad and his brother. We promptly get a phone call on our house phone from my dad's dad. And he's like, oh my goodness, I just saw your dad on national TV during the World Series. How cool was that? I don't know if he said cool, but he said, how neat was that? And incidentally, who was the other guy he was with? It was his other son. He didn't recognize his other son on national TV. But yeah, growing up, Ozzie and McGrain, I really liked those guys. Brian Jordan was a name. For those that don't remember, he was a really good player in the 1990s and also, by the way, played in the NFL for the Atlanta Falcons, one of the great athletes of our time. Brett Hall, one of my favorite hockey players growing up, of course. That's almost cliche to say, but I really like Brett Hall. But my favorite random St. Louis athlete of all time was Miguel Mejia. I don't know if you remember him from the 1996 Cardinals. He was a pinch runner, basically. That was his only job on the team, and he seldom hit, but they put him in, and he was on second base and in a key game in September of 1996, and the Cardinals hadn't made the playoffs since the aforementioned 1987. So it had been quite a while. We were hoping the team would make the playoffs in 96. They needed this game against the Los Angeles Dodgers. The Cardinals guy put down a bunt. Smart play. Let's get Miguel Mejia from second to third base with less than 2 outs. The bunt goes down. Miguel gets to third. And what does Miguel do? He keeps running. He keeps running. He tries to score. It was the dumbest decision in Major League Baseball history until he was safe at home. And then it was the craziest, awesomest decision in Major League Baseball history. And for the history buffs out there, it reminded many of 50 years prior in 1946 when the famed Cardinal Enos Slaughter had his mad dash. Now that was on a hit. He just kept running and scored in the 1946 World Series, what would be the winning run against the Boston Red Sox. And Enos Slaughter was an old country boy from North Carolina, and his nickname was Country. So Miguel Mejia in 1996, Mike Shannon started calling him Miguel Country Mejia, which I always thought was a clever and silly nickname. So on that, I'll just say thank you all for joining me here, for showing me your faces and asking your questions or just listening along on mute. It's fun seeing some names that I know. It's fun meeting some new people. And thank you for having me here today.
Thank you so much, Benjamin. We
Thanks.
really appreciate what a lively discussion we had, and thank you. We'll be looking forward to your book coming out.
Yeah.
And maybe in the spring, if we could have you back and talk about the book, that would be awesome.
Let's do it. Count me in. Put me on your calendar.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, everyone, and have a good day.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.